Story 1. The library. So the other day the library calls to have my department do some computer work for them. Usually they have their own IT staff, but sometimes our department will go over there too, help setting up machines and stuff like that. When I got there, they had just purchased 5 storage servers and a couple of data entry terminals they wanted set up for 2 graduate students. The graduate students were going to be working on a project to take a bunch of old archive stuff and convert it into a digital format for safekeeping and for analysis and research purposes. It was supposed to be a really cool project, and apparently the government had given them quite a large grant for the equipment. They had already unpackaged the computers downstairs in the sub-basement by the time that I arrived, and the only 2 people down there were the 2 grad students. Alicia looked a lot younger than she was, and she had curly strawberry blonde hair and was a little too cheery for my tastes. Max was the other grad student, and he seemed to have a much more gruff demeanor. They introduced themselves to me, and we chatted for a little bit until the head librarian came down to greet us. The head librarian and I had talked quite a few times before, and she and her husband had a private book collection that was worth several $1,000s, so she knew the value of the historical nature of books and proper handling and care. She was explaining all of this to the overly peppy Alicia and the under-peppy Max, and then she turned to me. She said, "Listen, this equipment is very expensive, and the government has paid top dollar to see that everything is set up perfectly. I don't want to tell you how to do your job, but please be careful with everything." Then she showed me where the computers went and explained the setup to me. She explained how each student would take documents and use a light scanner to scan the pages of documents or pictures into the computer, and then use the editing features of the software to correct any mistakes the scanner might have made. It was a fairly straightforward setup, so it wasn't difficult to get it set up in just a few hours. During that time, Alicia told me about how she was planning on becoming a librarian too, but that she really wanted to write for a living, and Max droned on for hours about how history was the only important thing on the planet. They seemed like pretty cool people, and when I wrapped up, I left them to their work. I gave them my card and told them that if there were any problems, they could call me directly, and I would come take a look at it. Everything went fine for the first couple of days, but one afternoon I got a call from Alicia. She didn't sound nearly as peppy this time, and told me that the scanner wasn't working at all, and she was having to put most of the data from the documents in manually. "It's just a bunch of scribbles," she said. I told her that I was busy right then, but I would check on it when I got off work at 5. Since the grad students had classes, they usually didn't start work until 2 or 3 in the afternoon anyway, and worked through most of the night. That evening I went down to the sub-basement and took a look at the scanner. It seemed like everything was set okay, and I told them that I would talk to my manager about setting up a service call from the manufacturer to check out the light. Now I wish I had just told them to shut it down until the technician could look at it. I should have known when I first saw those scribbles, but it was late, and I didn't want to waste my whole day trying to figure it out. I did give my manager the information, and she scheduled the work order for the following Thursday, but it doesn't look like that will do any good to anyone now. The next morning, I got a call on my personal cell phone at about 6 in the morning. It was Max. He just said, "Listen, goddamn it, I'm not doing this anymore until stuff starts working." I tried to calm him down, but he was completely irate. I told him to wait there, and I would be over to see him as soon as I got in. When I did get to the office, Alicia was eerily silent, and she seemed to have fixed a scowl onto me. I wrote it off to stress of working with faulty machinery, and I brushed off the problem as a manufacturer's defect because Max had pissed me off so badly. If I had just taken the time to look again, maybe we could have avoided what ca me next. That same night I got a call from the head librarian about the scanner not working correctly. She seemed pretty shaken up and told me that Max had called her up and screamed at her about unfit working conditions and about the noise that the machine was making. I had noticed that when I was there, but the dull humming of the scanners and the quick sliding sound as the light bar swept across the page was normal. I told her that it would be best if we just waited on the manufacturer to fix it, but I did tell her that I would go back to see if maybe it just needed to have some firmware updates or something like that. I honestly just said it to get her off the phone. I went out that evening at about 9 at night, but when I got there things had gotten much worse. All of the lights were off except for the scanner, and the noise wasn't just the normal mechanical noise of the scanner, but something so much worse. Looking back, I know that it sounded worse than Jay used broken. It sounded hurt and angry and alive. I plugged the main terminal into the Ethernet and tried to go online to see if there were any software or firmware updates, but everything seemed to check out. While I did this, Alicia barely spoke at all, but her scowl had turned from just a nasty look to a downright evil gaze. She slammed her keys on the keyboard to type in correctio NS, and she cursed under her breath. Max was also more intense. When I explained that there was nothing else I could do, he grabbed me by the collar, and I swear for a moment, when I looked into his eyes, I thought he was going to kill me. His face had twisted into this evil frown, and his eyes had seemed to grow wide. I don't think either of them blinked at me at all. Needless to say, I was pretty freaked out. I told Max to back off and continued blaming the manufacturer. I left them with a "Don't call me again. If you hate it down here so much, then you can just quit and go home. It's not my problem anymore." I don't know what it was that really set them off, but I know that we got an alert not to come into work the next day. When the technician from the manufacturer had a cancellation, he'd come in early, and the librarian let him in. When they got to the sub-basement, they found that Alicia and Max had a confrontation. Max had been killed and his body mutilated. Alicia had broken every one of his fingers and used hairpins to poke his eyes out. The doctors said that he was probably still alive then, with the cause of death being severe trauma to the brain. Alicia's hands had been completely shattered, probably from beating in Max's skull. Alicia was still barely alive, but her entire body was cut up. It may have been the blood loss, but they said she just screamed gibberish at the top of her lungs until the EMTs arrived, and then she managed to fight them for a long time until they were able to get her into the ambulance. She died of severe blood loss on the way to the hospital. Federal agents came in quick and they confiscated all of the equipment, but they also confiscated all of the historical documents. I heard someone the other day say that some of the documents that they lost dated back hundreds or even over 1,000 years old. They were part of some of the earliest occult work known. I don't know if scanning those documents made the computer equipment start to freak out, or if the computer and Max and Alicia got possessed by some evil spirit, or if reading that stuff was enough to make them crack. Maybe it was all just coincidence that he both happened to snap under the pressure of grad school and jobs and their personal life. Maybe it's nothing, but I can't help thinking about going there to fix those computers and plugging them all into the internet story too. That night, Quella. Not my mom is a terrible storyteller. She is a great conversationalist, a wonderful, sympathetic listener, and quite articulate into languages and her native Calabrese dialect, yet she is absolutely unable to narrate an event, personal or not, with any degree of conviction. She states the facts, but in an offhanded fashion. One such example. Oh yes, Cousin Rocky is okay. The transplant went well. Transplant? What happened to Rocky? I stuttered. Oh well, Greg gave him the kidney, and he's fine now. Thank God. Ma, could you please be a little less specific? I deadpanned, knowing full well I'd get a pretty short explanation of what I later found out to be the near death of my cousin, followed by emergency transplant of the kidney of his brother Greg. That sort of thing, yet, as banal as my mother may seem, I found out last week that she's been hiding something from us, and now suddenly a whole lot of the stuff we grew up with make a lot more sense. My mom and dad are getting older, so when they sold their house and bought a small condo about a mile from me and my husband, we were quite relieved that I could keep a closer eye on them. It wasn't easy for Mother to make the move, as she stated. I just got the house as secure as possible, and now we leaving. She was insistent, adamant, even that the condo they bought must be in a large development on the ground floor with as many people around as possible. My father knew after 50 years of marriage to not even attempt to budge her from this decision. He also knew that there'd be webcams, burglar alarms, and double and triple locks on every door. It was cute at first when we moved from a crowded Brooklyn tenement to the house in Cortlandt, and my mom absolutely freaked out about the backyard being too damn dark. My dad had to install motion detector lighting, then very new and very costly, and lights in the driveway on a timer, lights on the sides of the house, and she insisted that the attic, which she would not enter or even allow us to explore, have its own timer, lighting from dusk till dawn. Still, my dad adores my mom, and he did it all in resignation. That's love, anyhow. So back to the attic. It was bolted shut. Always was. We kids went absolutely nuts about that. There was a whole other floor up there that we could not access. My father went up there twice, 3 times a year to change the lighting, but the door was shut behind him and locked from inside. Once he was done, the door was locked and the padlock replaced. He'd do this when weren't around, but I recall being home one time and hearing footsteps above my room. I raced to the top of the stairs and pounded on the door asking to be let in, but he'd start cursing in Italian about una di quaranteni sia chi pura del buio, a 40-year-old woman, afraid of the dark. I did get in the attic that time for about a hot second, and there was absolutely nothing up there. No Christmas decorations, no boxes nor old furniture. Just plain white walls and those light fixtures. Windows had locks and nails driven into the sashes so they couldn't be opened from within or without. It was pretty odd. Our little neighborhood never saw break-ins, and why bother double-locking a third-floor window that offered no access in or out of it? Another of my mother's quirks. Sometimes I'd hear my mom talking to my old aunt in Bari in the very difficult dialect that she would not teach us children, and I could make out words here and there about something that had happened when they were both young. Even when our Aunt Zia Maria came to visit a few times, she would speak as standard Italian to us and only shared the dialect with my mom. I wish I could have understood more of their conversations, but Bersum is different enough that sometimes you could get the gist of the conversation, and sometimes not. It was the gaps that I filled in that scared me more. What thing came into their room? Was it a person? Did someone molest them? I could never understand. Any questions went unanswered. Even my dad was close-mouthed about it. Living in the suburbs was great, especially in the summers. We'd be out all day, swimming in Mohegan Lake, going to the mall, hanging in any one of our friends' basements, and generally waiting for something interesting to happen. There was some blackout once, and the Carvel near the mall was giving out all the ice cream free before it melted. Random happy childhood memories. That was big for us. It was also one of the nights that we saw a frightened, childlike side of our mother. She kept asking the neighbors if Yon had a spare generator. They didn't, and we certainly did not. My dad was on business, and although the phones were working, think pre-cellular days, he told my mom that he'd have to stay a couple more days as the airports were closed due to the power outages. My mom was a bit shaken, and even though she put up a brave front, we knew that the darkness was not her friend. It was hot that night, swelteringly so, and we made our way up from the lake with our flashlights back to our darkened homes. Mom was on the porch, smoking cigarette after cigarette, and told us that we would all be sleeping. In the living room that night, she made my brother and I pull the long sofa across the front door, and despite the heat, every window was closed and locked. Another quirk, I suppose. Around 3 a.m. or so, there must have been some lightning or some car noise outside, and my mom woke up screaming in a mix of Barese and Italian. Next thing you know, we are all in the car, in the driveway with tea, the windows rolled up, and the air conditioning blasting. It was a lot more comfortable than the living room. What morning would not come soon enough. We knew enough not question Mom, though sweet in Lova. Well, there were things you didn't talk about with her. Not regular parent stuff like sex. My parents are pretty liberal and didn't even bat when I came out as gay, and were relieved when I married my Italian, thank God, husband. But silly things. We didn't talk about my mom's fear of the dark, or all the locks, or all the lights, or the fact that we didn't go on vacations to the country, but stayed home and drove to the city for an afternoon or two, or how we couldn't join Boy Scouts or sleepaway camp or stay over anyone's house, or any one of a number of things had were annoying to a kid. So here I am now, clearing out the last few boxes from the house my parents closed on the condo, and were already in it. but they had left a few small boxes behind which I volunteered to take the keys to. Alex, my dad said. Which keys, Dad? I've got the front and garage door. No, the attic. I almost forgot. And lock it and leave the keys I. And the lock I could barely contain my surprise. Sicuro non te any preoccupare. Papa, slipping into Italian. Don't worry about it. I'll bring the boxes back here tomorrow. I had intended to go to the house later that day, but I got my brother on the phone and told him that I had gotten the keys. I didn't have to specify which keys he knew. He actually called in sick to work and met me over at our old childhood home. We bounded up the attic stairs and could barely fit the keys into the lock. We were finally getting in there, even if it was just for a final goodbye to a space that we had barely seen. There was a box in the center of the room, which was strange because that room was normally barren. What the hell, bro? What is in that old, dusty box? It was marked in childish handwriting, which I honestly didn't recognize. Open it up. Alex, the tape had long ceased to adhere to the carton, so I was able to open the package quite easily. It was a sheaf of drawing paper. There were what appeared to be children's drawings of my mom's and Zia Maria's, and then something bizarre. Light bulb-shaped black figures with enormous cat-like eyes drawn standing near my mom and Nat, near what looked like to be a child's drawing of a bedroom, maybe a bedroom in Bari, an attic bedroom, and then writing beneath it, Quella not sia ci hanno presso. That night they took us, and it all made sense. Story 3. Ink-filled dream. Oh, that my young life were a lasting dream, my spirit not awakening, till the beam of an eternity should bring the morrow. Edgar Allan Poe. In a dream Joseph saw himself sleeping, his 12-year-old body tucked in a thick comforter on top of his old hand-me-down mattress. Even as he stood by his bedside, looking at H. himself, he could feel the warmth of the comforter. Curious, he thought to himself, he decided to explore this dream. He looked out his window, the moon still bright, and with a bit of concentration he passed through the window like a ghost in a movie, gently floating to the ground from his second-floor room, in the way gravity's laws hold no sway over a dreamer. He explored the empty, wide streets as snow started to fall. With great leaps he could almost fly, floating as he ignored gravity and the rules of the wakening world. The streets were dark, and only the sound of an occasional car could be heard in the distance. Joseph did not feel the night chill he should have. After a little time of playing and exploring, he saw something down the darkly lit street. Was a figure, a silhouette of a child no older than him. The figure had no facial features and appeared to be a black mass only in the shape of a boy. It turned, even without eyes. Joseph could tell T was staring at him. Unnerved by the figure, Joseph ran home, moving faster than his wakening legs would manage. He never looked back to see if he was followed, stopping when he reached the front of S house. Standing on the front steps was his mother. The tall, blue-eyed woman was smoking a cigarette in her pajamas, breaking another promise to quit as she dropped the ashes into the flower pot. Next to her, Joseph wanted to yell at her. However, he quickly found he had no voice. As he tried to gain his mother's attention, he found she did not notice him at all. She tossed the last of her cigarette into the flower pot before going back inside. Joseph followed inside as well. and walking back to his room was the last thing he remembered before being awakened by the sun in his eyes. As he walked out the door the next morning, he nearly forgot his dream and the flower pot by the door there as a cigarette bud. She really is smoking again, he thought to himself, with a sigh as he made his way to the bus stop. It wasn't till lunch that he noticed how tired he was. Unable to keep his eyes open any longer, he fell asleep right in the cafeteria. Again he dreamed he saw himself face down in his chair, and the spitballs on his back from the kids at the table behind him. He watched the room a bit before moving out of the cafeteria. Unsure where to go, he moved to his next class. There he saw Miss Francis teaching the class on the schedule ahead of him. They looked to be taking a pop quiz. Joseph felt dread at the thought. Once again, and one of the kids or the teacher noticed him as he moved between desks, looking over each of his peers' shoulders. Bored of school, he decided to move outside. He put his hands to the window, ready to fell out them like he had done before. However, he noticed a dark figure just below. It was the faceless child again, crawling up the wall as it were the floor. It was on all fours, now looking even less human, with extended arms and fingers that ended in points like one large claw. Joseph almost fell out of his chair as the loud ringing noise of the bell went off. Once he stood up, he noticed the spitballs falling off his back. With a quick rub, he wiped the rest off angrily and moved on to the next period. There Miss Francis announced the pop quiz. The quiz read the same as it did before. Suddenly remembering the window, he ran over and looked down, yet there was nothing there. The rest of the class stared at him, mumbling, "Thought I saw something." He sat back down and took the quiz. Joseph, however, could barely write. He was starting to understand his dreams were more tied to reality than he thought. Over the next few days, Joseph went to bed earlier and early, looking forward to his dream-like playground. It was clear now that no one could see him in this state. He started with spying on his older sister as she spent time in her room, wakening and sneaking in the room later to confirm what he saw in his sleep. He did not see the dark figure for a few nights and slowly stopped thinking about it, enjoying his newfound powers too much. However, each time he waked, the less sleep he felt like he had gotten. His mother noticed her sleepy child and decided to keep him home from school in fear of illness. Before today, most of his trips into the dream world had been at night, so Joseph did not put up a fuss when his mother put him back to bed. His body quickly dazed to sleep while his mind, his spirit-like form awoke. He only took one glance at his sleeping body before running off to the school. This time he was free, with no time limit to spy on his peers. He moved faster than he even realized, surprised when he was already looking at the front gates of the school. Looking up at his classroom on the second floor, his smile quickly turned to a frown as the creature was standing on the other side. Joseph turned around to run away, but stopped when he heard a loud smash as the sound of glass landed on the ground. He turned around and saw his peers looking out of a broken window, confused. An angry teacher beyond them. Joseph was shocked at the realization this creature could affect the real world. As the weekend started, Joseph had doubts if he should still be exploring this dream world, despite his fears. However, he was enthralled. At this point, he slept more than he was awake. He saw his monsters more than once. but managed to avoid each time. This thing scared him, but it too was part of this dream world that fascinated him. He found it could change its shape, sometimes looking more human, more like a child. Other times it looked completely inhuman, like a dark beast. He always watched from a distance and ran away when it noticed him. If he was cornered, Joseph found he could force himself awake. He was addicted to the dream world his overworked mother failed to notice, and his teenage sister was too wrapped up in her own life to notice her oversleeping little brother. It was a cold night. Joseph was busy playing in the snowy streets when he noticed the creature, once a guy, and this time it was looking right at him. Standing in front of his house, it turned and walked through his front door. Panicked, Joseph thought it was going after his mother or sister and ran after it. He quickly checked his mother's room, but no sign of it. Then he looked in on his sister, but still not there. Joseph felt relieved for a moment before remembering that he still had his own body sleeping soundly in his bed. Rushing into his own room, he saw the creature sitting on the floor, looking like a human child without a face. A soft glow was next to him on the corner of Joseph's bed. A smile formed on the creature where there was no mouth before. On the floor next to his hand was Joseph's mother's lighter. Joseph could feel warmth in his feet and saw the glow for what it was, fire. He immediately tried to wake up, but he couldn't. The oil-like child got up off the floor and walking right through the wall. Joseph could not see it, but the newly formed mouth never left the shape of a smile. In a matter of moments, the fire spread over the old mattress. Joseph could feel the flames. He felt the burns, and he screams in agony, but makes no sound. He ran to his mother's side, trying desperately to wake her. All of his words were without sound, and she slept soundly as her son burned to death. The neighborhood was awake that night, watching firemen come into and out of their neighbor's house. A teenager and middle-aged woman were saved thanks to smoke detectors, but the firefighters could do little for the boy whose room the fire started in. The firefighters had seen this sort of thing before, an unwatched child playing with fire and an old mattress. Yes, this was likely another case of the same unknown Tui. Verioni else, however, there was someone else watching. Joseph watched as he saw his mother and sister crying, begging for them to notice him. Story 4: The Airborne Gift. The Airborne Gift and Harku. NT of the Winston bombing. The movie was fucking horrible. Sadly, the best part about it was the overpriced Dr. Pepper I bought beforehand. I wish I could say that the worst parts were the sappy Christmas scenes and the shitty bathrooms, but no, the worst was yet to come. Nonetheless, the whole thing absolutely reeked of cheesiness and soft-headed romance. The only reason I was even watching this stupid shitfest was because my friend had given me a ticket and described it as a witty comedy. I suppose that was her idea of a joke, because to my dismay, it was a really fucking stupid romantic comedy, and I was never exactly a huge fan of the genre in the first place. It happened around the point that I realized that the movie was going nowhere but downhill, and pretty damn far. Hasty by the looks of it. Looking around me at the sparsely packed theater, I could see several girls with glazed-over eyes, their entire beings infiltrated by this horrendous Christmas romance. A few of them had boyfriends with them who were all either snoozing or checking their watches impatiently. I stood up to leave when suddenly the movie was cut short and the lights were turned on. For a split second, I thought that somehow I had done something wrong, but then realized that would be ridiculous. Confused, I just stood there, waiting for something to happen. After much complaining from the girls and cries of relief from the boys, a greasy teenager stumbled in with an expression of pure terror on his face. I recognized him as the one who had sold me my Dr. Pep. Out, he screamed frantically. Everybody get out and just go home. I've no time to explain, just go. He was clearly in absolute terror of some unknown horror. There was a bit of baffled murmuring before an extremely obese woman heaved herself out of her chair. I was amazed that she could stand, much less manage to actually stuff herself into one of those seats. But I paid 50 for me and my young uns, she bellowed amidst a swarm of children. The terrified soda vendor took out his wallet and threw a wad of cash in her general direction, telling us even more fervently to leave, with a tense, trembling finger fixated on the emergency exit. When I finally made it outside, I was absolutely blown away by the chaos that met my eyes. As if every inmate of every asylum for the criminally insane had broken loose. Police were beating people senselessly. Cars were ramming into everything within reach. People were slaughtering each other right in the parking lot. Children screamed for their mothers. I needed to find out just what the fuck was going on there, so I found a man who looked safe enough to approach. Sir, I asked. Excuse me, sir, can you tell me what in the holy fuck is going on out here? He just stared at me hopelessly, with tears welled up in his eyes. You don't know, he replied. He was barely audible over the surrounding cacophony of madness. I shook my head. We're gonna die. They're gonna kill us all. We're gonna burn. Who's going to kill us? What's going to make us burn? He blinked at me, fresh tears rolling down his face. The nukes, they're gonna drop right here, right in this city. Who is doing this? He just shrugged his shoulders sadly and shuffled along. Seemingly in a daze, I simply stood there, dumbfounded. I was hardly aware of the anarchy around me. I just kept thinking, who's dropping the bombs? It couldn't be true. It just couldn't. It was less than a week before Christmas. There was no way this was happening. I tried telling myself that Walmart had been set on fire or that Apple went out of business, but I knew the man had been telling the truth. I just knew catastrophe was nigh. It eventually occurred to me to try and verify what the man had said, so I went from person to person. What they either didn't know anything, or it gave me the same story the first man had told me. Yet, nobody I asked seemed to know who it was that had launched the nukes. It wasn't until a police officer bashed me across the face and told me to go home that I snapped out of my panic. At first I started to walk back towards my car, but soon realized that there would be no way to get out of the parking lot amidst all this pandemonium, given the car was even still intact. Luckily, I only lived a few blocks away from the Winston Cinema, so it wouldn't take all that long to get home by foot. But who knew how long would be too long? The journey home wasn't much better than the parking lot. Every law there was under the sun seemed to have been thrown out the window. Vehicles lay stranded in the road. People lay injured or dead in the streets. Gunshots and explosions were incessantly sounding in the near distance, mostly from police, but some from civilians. Some of those areas also had tear gas being implemented, but luckily I managed to skirt around those areas. It wasn't until I was nearly home that the tornado sirens went off, but I knew all too well that it wasn't tornadoes. Those sirens, they were manifest omens of death, banshees wailing in the distance for all to hear, for all to know. Cold, chilling, blood-curdling, ghastly, all these words apply. It didn't matter if you plugged your ears, nor does it matter now that my ears have been blasted completely deaf. They're always sounding, always echoing in my head, always reminding me of my imminent death. They may have long grown silent since, but they might as well be still going off. Finally and miraculously, I managed to make it home without much difficulty. After locking and bolting all the doors and windows to keep people from breaking in, I immediately put my cat Greens into his carrier and brought him downstairs to the basement, along with his food and a bowl of water. I then brought all of my canned and non-frozen food down, followed by all of my drinks. I scoured my kitchen for any jars and containers, emptied and rinsed them, filled some with water, and brought them down too. It was as I was going back up for pillows and blankets that I first heard the distant buzzing of planes, strangely. First I just stood there, listening as the insect-like buzzing grew steadily louder, thinking to myself, why are they using planes instead of missiles? After that, I'm not really sure what exactly happened, for the next thing I remember was crying in the basement, with Greens in my lap, when the loudest, most godforsaken blast met my body and ears, which ultimately knocked me out, as I woke up on the ground, later in complete darkness, in what felt like an industrial furnace. My first thoughts were that I'd died and gone to hell. Well, half of that was true. I may not Ave die, but I certainly did go to hell. But I can feel my death coming soon. Everyone I ever knew or cared about is most likely dead. Friends, family, all gone, all of them. I knew I shouldn't leave the basement, but the heat was unbearable. There is no hope any more, none whatsoever. All I can do now is sit in this burning world and wait for that dark angel to finally take me from this place. Yet, despite my hopeless situation, something pushes me onwards in my meager and painful existence. I still drank this irradiated shit and still eat my irradiated food. I still kept on living after I crawled out of my basement into these charred ruins. I still kept going after Greens died purring and sick from radiation in my lap. I still breathe, even though the air burns my lungs. Something keeps me going. Looking around me, all I see is decay and ruin. The sun never shines anymore. The rain is black and the ash that hangs in the air pricks at my skin. I can barely breathe, and when I cough, blood comes out. It feels as if my organs are rotting alive, which probably isn't too far from the truth. I write this in the hopes that maybe somebody someday will find this and read it. I want the children of tomorrow to know just what exactly took place here in Winston in the year 2035. Maybe, just maybe, humanity will learn from its mistakes. But my hopes aren't high, because we obviously didn't learn from Nagasaki or Hiroshima. We still wage war and destruction, even though all it does is tear us apart. But at least now I can rest with the knowledge that I made at least some attempt to change the future. All I can do now is hope, despite how hopeless this all seems. Signed, Philip White. Story 5, The Scratch Man. Ever since I was tiny, I have had an overactive imagination. My mom always told me this was a gift, although I have found it an utter nuisance. What came with this which has proved to be the months? Inconvenient of all is my tendency to get scared often and also to seek out the things that made me most frightened. My most prominent memory of this in my childhood was a character who, and I honestly can't remember exactly, I think I called the Shadow Man. It all started when I was about 7 or 8, and I happened to be in another classroom at school. I can't remember why. All I can recall were the decorations on the large window panes. They were rudimentary cutouts of stick figures in black cartridge paper, with a series of spikes for hands, feet, and hair. The oddest thing about these little characters was their eyes. There were eye shapes, jagged, wide, and crude, cut out of the faces, and behind them a piece of red cellophane had been stuck, like the sort of stew see-through sweet wrappers are made of, so that when the sun shone through the windows, their eyes were illuminated. I know this doesn't sound particularly scary, but it is the founding of a truly terrifying image. Some time later I was staying at my grandparents' house. It was a little cottage on the corner of a road next to a church with a sprawling graveyard, which I have to say was rather picturesque. I was sat in the guest room, bouncing on the bed, when suddenly I felt a weird feeling creep over me, like somebody had poured a bucket of icy water over my head and extinguished my childish playfulness. I felt very afraid and sat completely paralyzed on the edge of the bed. Once my head stopped swimming and my heart had stopped pounding, I realized I could hear the reassuring clicking of my grandfather typing and the hum of the computer in the office across the tiny hall. I slipped silently out of my room and to the office door, which, to my confusion, was closed. It was never closed. I peered through the gap at the hinge. It was an old house, with thin wooden doors with many cracks and crevices, and what I saw made me stop. I had been planning to burst in and ask Grandpa if he wanted some biscuits from downstairs, but something seemed off. There was a man sitting at the desk, but I couldn't make any of his features out. It was like he was made of fog, wispy and intangible, but his long, smoky fingers brushed the keys nonetheless. He was making the reassuring click. At once it felt sort of angry. Who was this man, and why was he here? Using my grandfather's computer, I pulled the latch on the door and stopped in, ready to shout at this intruder. But the room was empty. There was a low whir as the computer shut down, the little blue light on the monitor flashing as the system switched off. But I could still hear the click. It was definitely the keys, and I was sure there had been somebody in the room. I could feel their presence like you can any person who is close to you. I fled downstairs. I really ran straight into the kitchen where my grandmother was cooking and stayed there. I didn't feel that presence again till what must have been a couple of years later. I had a nightmare. There was a boy made of black smoke who I saw in my house. He had a long, dark blade, which glinted in the dim light of my dream. Glinted while he killed my family. I ran away as fast as I could, screaming and panting and sobbing. Big, huge sobs with tears flooding my face, the nightmare went on, and each person who helped me, each person who took me and was killed, I kept running. Just running and running for what seemed like hours, until suddenly I screamed, "Stop." I spun around, and sure enough, he was there. I was a stubborn, rude child, and my personality had kicked in at this point. It had had enough. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, and just like that, I woke up again. There was a long period of time before I felt that fear again. This time I was 13 and in a Scouts group. Mondays and Wednesdays, from 7 till 9, I was in the Scouts building located at the end of a long driveway in a village near where I lived. We would have a break in the middle of each night where me and the older kids would walk down to the petrol station and buy snacks. This required us to walk across a long field besides the woods. In the dark, we would, of course, try to scare each other. That night it was particularly dark, and we had run out of traditional ghost stories by the time we got to the petrol station, so on the way back I told the story about the shadow man at my grandmother's house. Just as I finished telling it, we passed through the gate that led to field, which was a little bridge with ditches on each side. As I walked through the gate, something caught my leg. I yelped as I fell down into the ditch, my hands clawing at the dirt, dislodging rocks and earth which proceeded to fall on me. One of the rocks was huge, heavy, and landed flat bang on my chest. I choked and spluttered as many hands reached down to pull me out of the ditch. I was crying and gasping. I was badly winded, and for a second I thought I had broken a rib. Then I started to feel afraid, the wrong kind of afraid, and I took a deep breath against the pain and stood up. At my urgent request, we hurried across the field and back to the lights of the Scott building. I never spoke of the terrible feeling that washed over me. All I knew was that I had walked across that bridge dozens of times in the dark, and there wasn't a branch or rock or anything that obstructed the path. I never told them I felt something lines my ankle. I quit the club soon after that. But that incident wasn't the only reason. One night my mom drove me down the long, bumpy driveway, and as we passed the trees I felt more frightened of the shadows than I ever had before. I could see shapes twisting, smoky shapes riding between the shadowed trunks. This terror increased the further down the drive we got, until we reached the building beyond. It was completely dark, no light to be seen. Now I should have mentioned, sometimes they can't do the Scouts meeting and the building would stay locked up, but there was something very eerie about this time. My mom pulled up and started frowning. "Do you think we are early?" she said, turning to me. I was completely white and could barely utter my plea to get out of here. My chest burned. I couldn't breathe. My mind went racing back to that night, laying in the coal ditch with a giant rock on my chest, feeling like I was low saint in the shadows for hours before my friends pulled me out. I felt constricted. "Honestly, I think we are just early," hun, she said, going for the handle of the door. "Look, I think I can see a note on the doorstep. I'll just go check." "No, stay in the car," I shrieked, bursting into tears. I told my mom I had this horrible feeling of foreboding, and I just really wanted to leave. She drove all the way home without saying a word. The whole journey, all I could think about were the twisting shadows which lurked beyond the light of the car. But I felt safe in the car with my mom. When we got home, she made me a hot chocolate and knelt down in front of me. Look, you could have told me if you felt bad, okay? Sometimes, and not always when you're scared, but sometimes you just know way, and somewhere isn't safe. But you're fine now, okay? This was the last time I felt like that, for now at least. But there was one more thing, sorry. I'll shut up soon. I found an old book of children's poetry on a shelf in my room, and while I was flicking through it, I found a poem titled Nightmare. I can't remember the whole thing, but it goes something like this. I check behind the door and under my bed. I close my eyes and count to 10. I turn my pillow over 3 times, but still you come. Your long fingers scraping against each other. The scratch man. Oh, no, I said his name. Mummy, I can't sleep. The reason I included this is because there was a picture with the poem. In the picture was a shadow. The shadow of a man with long, spiky fingers and long, spiky hair. Story 6. Atonement. Walter Thomas lied in his deathbed, tired and sleep-deprived, nestled underneath the covers. He had reached the ripe old age of 95 and knew that his time was almost due. He had not reached this age by living a healthy and wholesome lifestyle, but rather by stubbornness and an unrelenting will to live. He had done many things over the span of his lifetime that he had come to regret. He had hurt everyone around him who loved and cared about him in one way or another, and now he felt it was too late to atone for his sins. A feeling of dread dwelled deep within him of what might await him in the afterlife. He now waited helplessly for his impending fate, afraid to fall asleep in fear that he may never wake up. To pass the time, he stared at the clock on the wall of the other side of the room. It didn't help to ease his anguish and despair, though. Every time the clock ticked, Walter could feel his life slipping away from his fingerti. T.S. as he knew he was just 1 second closer to entering the realm of the unknown. The tension and suspense created by waiting for the inevitable was literally killing Walter on the inside. He couldn't handle the pressure any longer. Part of him wanted to just die and get it over with. But another part knew that what awaited him afterward may be much worse than anything he may be suffering from at the moment. He decided to continue to cling on to life. Suddenly, a man in a black cassock entered Walter's room carrying a Bible. He was a rather young and handsome-looking man with compassionate yes, and neatly groomed black hair. He took a seat by Walter's bedside. Walter hissed in anger and distaste at the man and withdrew into the covers. I know who you really are. You can fool me. Leave me alone and be gone from this place, shouted Walter. The man sighed. Walter, you're being irrational. There's no need to be afraid of me. I know why you're here. You've come to take me away, said Walter. Everyone must face me at some point or another in their lifetime. It's inevitable, replied the man. Walter removed the covers from his head. You wasting your time. I have no interest in what you have to say to me. Go bother someone else. Once again, the man sighed. Walter, we've been playing this game for several years now. Frankly, I am getting quite tired of it. You're going to die one way or another. Why must you prolong the inevitable? Walter huffed in reply, you know damn well the reason why. Whatever fate awaits me is far worse than anything I could possibly imagine now. You don't know that countless numbers of people have gone through this before you. No one's fate is sealed. There are an endless number of possibilities that can happen. Well, I am not interested in finding any of them out, replied Walter. Perhaps some scripture will change your mind. Here's a verse from Luke 17:33. He thumbed through the pages of his Bible. Whoever seeks to keep his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life will preserve it. Oh, cut it out. That doesn't even make sense, shouted Walter. If I lose my life, I'm going to suffer for eternity. I just know it. The man took a moment to think. If you won't listen to me, perhaps there is someone who you will listen to. Good luck with that, replied Walter. The man got up and walked out of Walter's bedroom. Shortly after, a small and frail old lady entered the room. Her soft gray hair was tied back into a bun, and her wheat-colored skin was wrinkled and weathered from years of hardship. Walter looked up at her with shock and surprise. "Eleanor, is that really you?" said Walter. The woman gave a warm smile and looked down at him with her kind eyes. "Of course it is, Walter, but that's not possible. You've been dead for 10 years, replied Walter. Death will never be able to keep me apart from you, Walter. Eleanor, why do you treat me so well? I never deserved a woman like you. Oh, Walter, it breaks my heart to see you in this state, replied Eleanor. You've always had much compassion for me. I wish I wouldn't have been such a fool and taken that for granted, said Walter. You're being too hard on yourself. What happened in the past is over with. You need to move on with our life. But how can I ever make up for all the things that I have done to you? The constant abuse, neglect, and malicious remarks, asked Walter. She softly caressed his cheek. You don't need to make it up, Walter. I have already forgiven you. I just want you to move on and be happy. But I'm afraid, said Walter. I don't know what awaits me on the other side. Then let's find out together, replied Eleanor. She extended her hand towards Walter. Slowly, Walter reached his hand out and gently grasped hers. He stepped out of bed and proceeded to hobble out of the room with his wife, hand in hand. A brilliant light radiated outside of the doorway. Walter took a moment to pause. He looked behind him and saw his mortal body resting peacefully in bed. I guess there's no going back now, said Walter. They stepped into the bright light together and became enveloped by its embrace. As Walter entered into the light with his wife, he felt all of his stress and tension release. An overwhelming wave of warmth and euphoria spread throughout Walter's entire body. In that moment, Walter was happier than he had ever been in his entire life. The warm feeling inside him began to grow warmer. As Walter progressed, it continued to grow even warmer. The temperature started to get a little bit uncomfortable. Walter's feeling of euphoria went away and turned into confusion. The heat increased even more. Walter grew uneasy. He tried to turn around to head back, but it was no use. There was nothing to go back to. He suddenly noticed that his wife was no longer beside him. Eleanor, where did you go? Walter cried out. He looked around through the sea of blinding light, but saw no sign of her. Suddenly, a familiar voice spoke to Walter. She's not here, Walter. Walter looked around to find the source of the voice. To his dismay, he saw that there was a young man in a black cassock staring at him. However, his face seemed to be changing images back and forth like a lenticular picture from a handsome, clean-shaven man to a black, featureless pool of darkness. Walter clenched his fists and glared intensely at the figure before him. "Where's she-H?" Walter shouted. "She is in a happy place, I assure you," it replied. "However, I am unfortunately not able to say the same about you. You tricked me." Walter cried out. "I knew I should have stayed in bed. I knew it, as his anger heightened. The temperature increased even more. The air grew thick to the point where it seemed to have substance. "I am sorry I had to resort to such tactics, but this was getting ridiculous. I have other clients who I need to attend to," the figure said. "I don't want to hear another word of your lies," shouted Walter. The heat grew more intense. Walter felt a mild burning sensation throughout his entire body. His anger quickly turned into fear. "Get me out of here and return me to my home at once, Washington," Etter demanded. "I'm afraid I cannot carry out your request. It is already too late for you," the figure replied. "Please let me go home," Walter cried. The air grew thicker and toxic. Every breath Walter took, he felt a searing pain course throughout his lungs. He tried to cry out to the figure for help, but he choked and coughed on his own words. He stumbled and fell to the floor. He tried to get back up, but was unable to. The sea of light that surrounded Walter slowly turned into a sea of fire and engulfed him completely. The heat became too intense to bear. An unimaginable sensation of pain seared throughout every square inch of Walter's body as he writhed around uncontrollably. The figure stared at him sympathetically. "I really am sorry that this had to be your fate," I hones. "I didn't know this was going to happen to you. Unfortunately, your fate is out of my control. I'm just responsible for the affairs that take place when transitioning to the next life. If you'll excuse me now, there are many others who are awaiting my arrival." In an instant, the figure was gone, and Walter was left alone to suffer and perish for eternity. Story 7. The White. My grandmother would always tell me ghost stories when I was young boy. She would tell me why I would always wake up at 3 a.m. with a heavy weight on my chest, or why I would hear the walls creak in the winter. Now that I'm older, I know that these stories of hers could be explained with things like sleep paralysis or the heat coming on in an old house. But there was one story she told me that I have yet to debunk. Never wander off alone on a cold winter night, she would say to anyone with half a brain. This should already be obvious for many different reasons, none of which are supernatural. However, when she continued with her cautionary tale, the consequences were not what you might have expected. For if you stray away from your family and friends, you will fall victim to the snow, and he will find you. Who? I asked in a shaky voice. He who breathes tainted life into what has long since perished. The necromancer who lives beneath the ice. What will he do? What he does is unspeakably horrific, she said, her mouth twisting up into a sinister grin. When he finds you, wandering alone in his domain, he will pierce your heart with his cold claws, but the nightmare does not end here. After you are dead, he will bring you back as his undead slave, a cold, mindless zombie, a white. This is typically where my parents would step in and tell my grandmother she was scaring me. She would continue with these stories up until the day she died, but never did admit to any of them being fiction. When I got older, my grandmother's stories began. to fade into the back of my mind. In truth, I never really thought about them at all until recently. I was a junior in college and lived with my girlfriend at the time, Jessica, in a small apartment in northern Massachusetts. During winter break, we decided to go on a ski trip together. Nothing fancy, just a weekend trip, as we were packing the last of our gear into my car. My girlfriend hesitated for a moment. "Is everything okay?" I asked, thinking that maybe she was having second thoughts. "Yeah, I'm fine," she said. "It's just someone said something really weird to me in class the other day, and it's just been bugging me." I turned to her after making sure the last of our belongings were safely in the trunk. "And why?" "Oh, tell me what. I'm sure it's nothing to worry about." She looked up. "They told me that those mountains are haunted by a girl that died there a couple of years ago." It took me a moment to think about what she said. It was true that a young girl did go missing a few years back, and one of her friends was later found dead. But I had never heard any ghost stories involving the incident or those mountains. "Don't let them scare you," I said with a smile. "They probably just wanted some attention." She looked at me, reassured, and gave me a kiss. "I guess you're right. After all, I have you to protect me." With that, I gave her a hug and we were on our way. We reached our destination after a couple of hours. It had begun to snow, but nothing that would hinder our ability to ski. After a quick lunch, we headed out to complete our first run of the day. When we got to the top of the ski lift, we made our way to a trail marked with a green square. "Ready to go?" I asked, readjusting my goggles. "Lead the way," Jessica replied. "Just stop halfway down in case I fall behind." The trail wasn't challenging at all, but I figured we might have wanted to start off easy. After all, neither of us had skied in over 2 years, so I was convinced we'd be rusty. It was just like riding a bike. After I got the hang of it again, I was finding every little bump I see how to jump off. Since it was a beginner trail, though, they were hard to find. I slid to a stop at the halfway point. Jessica was nowhere in sight. I knew she was a strong skier, so wasn't really worried about her falling or getting her on such an easy run. 10 minutes passed, no Jessica. 20 minutes passed, still no Jessica. After a half an hour of waiting, I knew something was seriously wrong. I took my skis off and walked up the mountain. There was no sign of her at all. Nobody even looked concerned, like they might have if they saw her crash. It was almost as if she just vanished. With no luck, I put my skis back on and returned to the lodge. I told staff what happened, but even after hours of searching, even they couldn't find her. I felt like I was living in a bad dream. This was the kind of thing that happened in movies, but never in real life. Before it got too dark, I decided to try my luck and search by the woods near the lodge. "Jessica, I yelled. "Jessica, where are you?" No answer. I was blinded by my determination, and before I knew it, I was so deep into the snow and trees I had no idea how to get back. It started to get dark. I was scared, not only for what might have happened to my girlfriend, but for myself. I was lost in the woods at night during the winter. I was an adult and was taught to believe in logic, but for some reason I couldn't get my dead grandmother's voice out of my head. Never wander off alone on a cold winter night. For if you stray away from your family and friends, you will fall victim to the snow and he will find you. I felt like I was going insane. Why was I so scared of this made-up creature more than something that made sense like lack of food or a wild animal? All of a sudden, I hear a soft voice that brought me back to reality. "I'm cold," it said. For a second, I thought maybe it was Jessica. "Jessica, is that you? I should there run. I should have got out of those woods as soon as I felt the fear manifest inside my chest." "I'm cold," the voice repeated, only this time it was louder. It wasn't Jessica. The voice sounded ethereal. -1, like a small animal trapped in cage just waiting for my inevitable demise. It was then that I locked eyes with a young girl. For a moment, time stood still, and the world seemed to go quiet. The girl was wearing a long coat and what looked like a beret. Her hair was short and blended in with the snow. What shook me to my core, though, were her eyes. They were nothing but black sockets with glowing blue orbs in the middle. If it wasn't for the eerie blue light they emitted, I would have never seen the body crumpled in a heap in front of her. It was Jessica. Jessica. I choked and fell backwards onto a nearby tree trunk. My whole body was numb. I truly felt as though this was the end, but the girl never moved. She just stood there above Jessica's body, those horrible blue lights not once taking their gaze off me. I stumbled, regaining feeling in my legs, and started running. I had no idea where I was or if I would get out alive. Eventually, by some miracle, I made it out of those woods to the lodge. I told the police what I saw that night. Well, some of what I saw anyways. I left out the part about the girl. They found Jessica's body. It never released a report of what caused her death. I took a semester off after the incident. My professors were understanding and told me to take care of myself. It's been a year since all of this happened. I'm doing well in school and even managed to land a part-time job at the cafe by my apartment. People think I'm crazy when I tell them what I truly believe is lurking in those mountains, and frankly I don't blame them, so for the fun of it, I'll tell you my theory. That girl who went missing was the one I saw that night standing over Jessica's body. She fell victim to the snow, and he found her. He who breathes tainted life into what has long since perished. The necromancer who lives beneath the ice. What he did was unspeakably horrific. When he found her, wandering alone in his domain, he pierced her heart with his cold, icy claws. But the nightmare did not end there. After she died, he brought her back as his undead slave. A cold, mindless zombie, a white,